My own mother once told me, "You'll never be classy enough for our family." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, as if humiliating me was her favorite form of affection. I can still see the chandelier light trembling above us that night, reflecting off the shocked faces of our guests. My throat burned, but I smiled, because in our family, appearances mattered more than feelings. My sister, Clara, tried to hide her smirk behind a champagne glass. My father stayed silent, pretending not to notice the tears I fought back. That one sentence didn't just bruise me, it branded me. It reminded me, over and over, that I would never belong to the picture-perfect world my mother built around her reputation. I wasn't polished enough. Not graceful enough. Not her enough. But what she didn't realize was this: every insult she threw became a stitch in the fabric of my revenge. And the night I finally proved her wrong, she was forced to watch, in silence, as her imperfect daughter redefined what class truly meant. People always said we were the perfect Moore family. Elegant dinners, polished smiles, designer clothes. We looked like the kind of family that had everything figured out. My mother, Vivian, made sure of that. She believed respect came from how others saw you, not from how you treated them. Every Sunday dinner felt like a performance, and we were the actors in her carefully directed play. Clara, my older sister, was the star of that show. She had my mother's confidence, her voice filled the room, her laughter demanded attention. When guests complimented her, my mother's eyes would shine with pride. And when they turned to me, Vivian would add, "Bella's more simple. She likes quiet things." That word, simple, sounded sweet but stung like a hidden slap. My father, Richard, didn't notice much. His world revolved around business calls and golf invitations. He'd pat my shoulder occasionally and say, "Listen to your mother. She knows what's best for appearances." It wasn't advice. It was dismissal dressed as guidance. Our grandmother, Eleanor, ruled over every gathering like a queen. She'd sip her tea and compare us openly. "Clara reminds me of Vivian at her age, so poised," she'd say. Then her eyes would drift to me. "And Bella, well, she's gentle. Every family needs one who listens more than she speaks." I'd smile politely, pretending not to feel the weight of their quiet disapproval. I tried, desperately, to fit in. I learned how to sit straight, how to hold a fork properly, how to dress in neutral tones like my mother. I even started reading the same society magazines she adored. But no matter how hard I tried, my efforts felt invisible. It was as if I was standing behind a glass wall, watching a family I could never truly be part of. One evening, I made dinner myself, roasted lamb, Vivian's favorite. She smiled politely when she took the first bite, then placed her fork down. "You tried," she said, with that soft, elegant cruelty she'd perfected. "But you should leave things like this to Clara. Presentation matters." Clara giggled, brushing her perfect curls behind her ear. I looked at the table, at the silverware, the candles, the spotless plates, and wondered what more I had to do to be enough. After dinner, as I cleaned up, I heard my mother's voice from the other room. She didn't know I was still nearby. "Bella just doesn't have that refined touch. It's embarrassing sometimes." Her words hit harder than any slap. My hands froze over the sink, the water still running. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, tired eyes, trembling lips, and a silence too heavy to break. That was the night I realized something deeper was wrong. This wasn't just favoritism. This was rejection disguised as refinement, and I was the flaw in her perfect family portrait. It all began with an opportunity, a single email that could have changed everything. I had spent months quietly sketching designs in my room, hiding my work under old books so no one would find it. It was my dream to create fashion that told stories, clothes with emotion, not just price tags. When I learned about the Evelyn Hart Fashion Fellowship, a prestigious internship in New York, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I submitted my portfolio secretly, signing my name as Isabella Moore, not Bella, as my mother preferred. A week later, I received the email. "Congratulations. You've been shortlisted for the final round." My heart raced. For once, it wasn't about family image, it was about me. That night at dinner, I decided to tell them. "I made it to the finals for a design fellowship," I said softly, barely lifting my eyes. Clara looked up first, a small smile tugging her lips. "Fashion? Oh, how cute," she said, glancing at my mother. Vivian's knife paused mid-cut. "A design fellowship," she repeated slowly, as if the words themselves were offensive. Bella, we discussed this. You need to think realistically. You're not made for that world. But, Mom, they liked my work, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. They said my designs were unique. She exhaled sharply. Unique isn't always elegant. You don't understand refinement, the class that comes with true artistry. Don't embarrass yourself chasing fantasies. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I'm not chasing fantasies, I'm trying to build something of my own. Her expression hardened. Your sister has a real career starting in public relations next month, respectable, professional. Maybe you should learn from her instead of wasting time sewing. Richard stayed silent as always, his fork clinking softly against his plate. His silence was worse than her cruelty. I didn't argue further. I just nodded and excused myself. But the next morning, everything shattered. The fellowship director called, her voice kind but hesitant. Isabella, I'm sorry, but we'll be moving forward with other candidates. We received a concerning reference about you. From who? I asked, heart pounding. There was a pause. A Mrs. Vivian Moore. The room spun. My own mother had called them, told them I wasn't professional material, that I lacked Polish, discipline, and social awareness. When I confronted her, she didn't even flinch. She was arranging flowers in the living room, as if nothing had happened. You called them? I demanded. You ruined my chance. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. I protected you from humiliation. You're not ready for that world, Bella. Tears burned behind my eyes. You didn't protect me. You just couldn't stand the thought of me standing out without your permission. She turned then, meeting my eyes with that cold, perfect smile. Class isn't something you earn, darling. It's something you're born into, and you never quite had it. The words crushed something inside me. I walked out before she could see me break. Outside, the air felt heavy, the night sky pressing down. I stood under the porch light, gripping my sketchbook, the same one she once called childish. That was the moment the last bit of me that needed her approval died. And what replaced it was something far stronger, a quiet, burning promise. She wanted me invisible. I would make sure the world saw me instead. After that day, something inside me went quiet. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped hoping they'd understand. But silence, I learned, only made them bolder. At first, it was small things, subtle jabs hidden behind polite smiles. During brunches, my mother would say things like, Clara, dear, your posture is so graceful. You really take after me. Then her eyes would flick toward me. Bella, maybe you could join a finishing class or something. It might help you. Everyone would laugh softly, pretending it was harmless. I'd smile, because that's what I was trained to do, and excuse myself under the pretense of checking on dessert. In the kitchen, I'd let out the breath I'd been holding, the taste of shame still sharp in my mouth. Then came the summer charity event, the one Vivian hosted every year for her high society circle. She called it an evening of elegance. That night, the house glittered with chandeliers and forced laughter. My mother looked radiant in her silver gown. Clara shimmered beside her, wearing a designer dress Vivian had bought from Italy. I wore one of my own designs. Simple, minimal, elegant, but not branded. Vivian's lips tightened the second she saw me. Bella, she said quietly, this isn't appropriate for tonight. You look too plain. It's my design, I replied softly. I thought. Exactly, she cut in, turning to a guest with a practiced smile. My younger daughter still experiments with personal projects. The woman laughed politely. Oh, how adorable. My cheeks burned. I wanted to disappear. As the evening continued, I watched Clara glide across the room, collecting compliments while I served drinks, ignored and invisible. My mother's friends whispered about me, not loud enough to be called rude, but loud enough for me to hear. Later that night, Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor, leaned close and said, Your sister has your mother's elegance, dear. You're more of a free spirit, I suppose. Her smile was sweet, her words weren't. I excused myself, stepping out into the garden for air. My eyes welled up, but I forced the tears back. From inside, I could still hear their laughter, the music, my mother's voice echoing proudly as she toasted to family perfection. The next morning, photos from the event were all over social media. Clara tagged everyone, except me. In one shot, I stood awkwardly in the background, blurred by the camera's focus. The caption read, "An unforgettable night at the Moore residence." That was the moment I realized how completely I'd been erased from their picture. Days turned into weeks. Vivian's criticism sharpened, Clara's arrogance grew, and I stopped trying to please either of them. I worked quietly at night, stitching, sketching, and sending designs to small boutiques online. My brand, under the name Miss LaGrace, began to find its audience. Orders came in slowly, then steadily. One afternoon, I overheard Clara telling my mother, some low-end brand called Miss LaGrace got featured in Belle Vogue. Looks amateurish, but people love it. Vivian scoffed. Fashion today has no standards. Anyone with a needle can be a designer now. I smiled silently from the next room. They didn't know it was me. But I did. And for the first time, the humiliation didn't hurt, it motivated me. Because something was coming. Something they would never see coming. The betrayal didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It came quietly, in the kind of silence that feels too heavy to breathe through. It was the week of Clara's engagement. My mother had been planning it for months, the guest list, the decor, the designer gowns, even the color scheme. It wasn't just an engagement, it was a public exhibition of her family's flawless reputation. I tried to stay out of the way. I worked longer hours, stitching new designs for Miss LaGrace, pretending not to notice that I hadn't been asked to help. But when the invitations went out, I noticed something strange. My name wasn't listed as a family host, not even under siblings of the bride. At first, I thought it was a mistake. So I asked her, "Mom, my name's not on the invitation," I said, holding the printed card between trembling fingers. Vivian didn't even look up from the pearls she was arranging. "Yes, darling. We thought it would be better that way. The photographers will be there, and you don't quite fit the image we're presenting." I froze. The image? "Clara's marrying into a very refined family," she continued calmly. "They are known for their elegance, their class. I don't want anyone questioning where you came from or what you do for a living." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because disbelief was the only thing keeping me from crying. "So I'm your daughter, just not the right kind to be seen." Vivian sighed. "Don't be dramatic, Bella. You can attend, of course. Just, quietly. Stay out of the spotlight." Her words hit like glass splintering underfoot, sharp, deliberate, final. The night of the engagement arrived like a storm I didn't want to face. The mansion glowed with fairy lights, music spilled into the garden, and every corner smelled of roses and wealth. Clara was radiant, floating across the room in a white designer dress my mother had handpicked. I watched from the edge of the crowd, my own dress, one of my own designs, ignored, unseen, forgotten. At one point, Vivian called for a toast. She lifted her glass high and smiled toward the guests. "To my beautiful daughter Clara, the pride of our family. The perfect example of grace, elegance, and class." Her voice rang through the hall, smooth as silk and twice as cruel. Everyone clapped. I didn't. My eyes burned, but I refused to let a single tear fall. Later that evening, I overheard a conversation near the terrace, my name drifting through laughter. "She's the creative one, right?" someone asked. "Oh yes," Clara said lightly. "She sews her own clothes. It's kind of cute, actually. Like a hobby." The group chuckled. My mother added, "We all have our roles in life. Bella's just not meant for the spotlight." Their laughter blended with the music, and that sound, carved itself into me. I slipped out quietly, my heels clicking against the marble as if each step carried the weight of my own invisibility. Outside, the air was cold. The garden lights blurred through the tears I could no longer hold back. I walked until the noise faded, until all that remained was silence and the echo of my mother's voice in my head. "You're not meant for the spotlight." 4 days afterward, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The house that once felt suffocating now felt completely empty. They had celebrated without me, laughed without me, and I realized something painfully clear. I could disappear, and none of them would even notice. Then, one afternoon, while clearing old mail, I found a thin white envelope on the desk. It was addressed to me. Inside was a document, an updated will. My name wasn't there anymore. Every asset, every inheritance, every property, now went to Clara. I sat there staring at the page, my heart a hollow drum. My mother had not only erased me publicly, she had erased me legally. I didn't cry this time. Not even when I read the last line in her handwriting. This decision reflects family values and public representation. It was no longer about favoritism or jealousy. It was about punishment, for being different, for refusing to become her reflection. That night, as I sat in the dark with the will still clutched in my hands, something inside me shifted. The pain didn't fade, it transformed. All the humiliation, all the rejection, every whispered insult, they stopped feeling like wounds. They started feeling like fuel. I whispered to myself, if she wants to erase me, she'll have to watch the world remember my name. And in that single breath, the broken daughter died. What was left was someone my mother would never recognize, and could never control. After the will and the engagement, I stopped looking for permission. Pain was a teacher, humiliation became a map. I spent a week in the small attic room I'd turned into a studio and did the only thing that steadied me. I worked. Every stitch, every seam, every late-night sketch was a promise I made to myself. I would not beg for a place at their table. I would build my own. First, I turned strategy into survival. I registered Isla Grace properly, a business name, a trademark, a bank account under a company name. I kept my personal life invisible and let the brand wear the armor. Noah helped with logistics, quiet conversations over cheap coffee, his steady voice in the dark. You're better than their approval, Bella, he said. Make them notice you whether they want to or not. His faith was a quiet flame I fed. Then came the dangerous, careful part. I needed the kind of exposure they respected, the social circle, the glossy pages, the people who treated image like currency. I hired a small, anonymous PR consultant with money I'd saved from freelance work. I started seeding Isla Grace pieces to boutique owners and micro-influencers, watching them share the clothes without mentioning a designer's family name. Orders trickled, then swelled. Reviews called the designs unexpectedly elegant, minimal and haunting, and the phrase I most wanted to hear, fresh class. I leaned on Liam, the event planner who had always treated me like a person instead of an accessory. He was the pivot, his contacts, his ability to place a brand in front of the right crowd. We made a plan that felt risky on paper and explosive in my heart. He promised to feature Isla Grace at the gala Vivian was hosting, not as my work presented by me, but as a celebrated external designer's collection. I would stay in the wings while the family applauded what they thought was a stranger's success. Are you sure about this? Liam asked one night, concern rough in his voice. I looked at the mood board, at the invitations stacked like tiny white flags, and felt both terror and calm. I'm sure, I said. They'll applaud a brand. They'll pretend to love it. Then they'll learn who made it. We built contingencies. I set up a separate legal entity to handle invoices, so no paper trail would lead back to me. I scheduled a curated feature in a mid-tier fashion magazine under Isla Grace's name, a soft launch story that wouldn't attract the kind of scrutiny Vivian might recognize, but it would start whispers. I arranged for photographers to capture certain guests wearing Isla Grace pieces, knowing social media would do the rest. I made sure Clara would be present, chosen, as always, for her polished elegance, and I arranged for one of my gowns to be the highlight of the evening without her realizing. Emotionally, I steeled myself. Revenge wasn't about a public scream, it was about a slow, surgical unmasking of everything my mother had taught her circle to worship. It was dangerous because it relied on deception, the kind that might crumble and leave me exposed again. It was personal because every choice was designed to force them to look at me and see what they had refused to see all these years. On the night before the gala, I laid out the pieces on the bed, simple lines, soft fabric, a quiet kind of beauty that didn't shout but refused to be ignored. I traced a seam with my finger and felt my old hurt settle into resolve. Tomorrow, I whispered to myself, they will clap for a name they think they own. They will be the audience to their own exposure. Outside, the house slept under chandeliers. Inside, I folded the last dress, and for the first time since the insult, I felt the tilt of power shift, just a little. The plan was set. The stage was nearly ready. And then came the moment that made my hands cold with electricity. I put the dress into its bag, closed my studio door, and waited for Liam's call, the signal that everything either would work, or it would break me for good. The night of the gala shimmered like a dream, the kind of dream built on money, pride, and lies. The chandeliers glowed gold. The guests sparkled in gowns that cost more than some people's homes, and my mother's laughter floated through the air like a practiced melody. Vivian Moore stood at the center of it all, flawless, radiant, untouchable. Beside her, Clara was every inch the daughter she adored, elegant, confident, dressed in a silver gown that dripped luxury. They were the image of perfection, the very portrait I had been erased from. And tonight, they would destroy themselves with the image they worshipped. I entered quietly, not as a daughter, but as a guest, anonymous among the crowd. My hair was swept into a soft bun, my dress simple yet striking, one of my own designs. People glanced at me but didn't recognize me, not yet. I watched from the edge of the ballroom as Liam moved smoothly through the crowd, managing every cue like a conductor before the final note. Vivian caught sight of me across the room, her expression freezing for a fraction of a second. Then she smiled that sharp, polite smile. "Bella," she said, approaching with calculated grace. "I didn't realize you'd be here. This is a society event, dear, not a craft fair." I returned her smile, calm and cold. "Don't worry, Mother. I know exactly what kind of event this is." Before she could reply, the lights dimmed slightly, the cue for the fashion showcase. Liam's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, the Moore Foundation proudly presents an exclusive collaboration with Isla Grace, a designer whose vision redefines elegance through simplicity and strength." Applause rippled through the room. Vivian turned toward the stage, her eyes bright with pride. She had no idea. One by one, models glided across the runway, draped in designs that were unmistakably mine. Each piece carried a story, a quiet rebellion stitched into silk. The guests murmured with admiration. Even Clara whispered, "These are breathtaking." Vivian leaned toward a friend and said proudly, "I knew this designer had potential. That's real class." And then Liam stepped back up to the microphone. "Before we continue," he said, smiling, "the designer herself has requested to say a few words." The spotlight shifted and landed on me. For a heartbeat, the world was still. I heard my mother's breath catch, felt Clara's confusion like a tremor in the air. I stepped forward slowly, each step a reclaiming of every insult, every humiliation, every dismissal they'd ever handed me. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "My name is Isabella Moore, founder and designer of Isla Grace." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the whispers, the gasps, the cameras turning. Vivian's eyes widened, disbelief giving way to horror. "What are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. "This is a family event." "Yes," I said softly, my gaze locking on hers. "A family that never believed I belonged, until now." I turned back to the crowd. Every stitch in these gowns was sewn by a woman they once called unrefined. Every design they praised tonight was created by the daughter they said would never be classy enough. I want to thank my family for teaching me what true class isn't. The audience broke into applause. Some stood. Cameras flashed like lightning. Vivian tried to smile, but her face faltered, the illusion cracking under the weight of truth. Clara stepped closer, whispering fiercely, "You planned this, you set her up." I looked at her, calm, steady, untouchable now. "No, Clara. I just gave her the mirror she's always avoided." The applause grew louder, filling the hall like thunder. Vivian turned away, her composure unraveling. For the first time in my life, I watched her crumble, not from scandal, but from exposure. The woman who built her world on image now stood surrounded by people who had seen her truth. Liam approached, nodding subtly, his expression unreadable but proud. I gave a small smile and whispered, "It's done." As the music swelled and the cameras captured every moment, I stood beneath the same chandelier that once watched me break. But tonight, its light didn't mock me, it crowned me. My mother slipped out of the room in silence. Clara followed, her steps shaky. And I remained, standing in the center of applause that didn't belong to their image anymore. It belonged to mine. Because that night, under the golden lights of their perfect world, I didn't just take back my dignity. I redefined what it meant to be a Moore.